Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome back in our special public program, Media Explosion, that, as you know, is a cooperation, New Academy of Fine Arts and la Triennale di Milano under the framework of the public program Upside Down of la Triennale di Milano. Today, we have with us Lev Manovich, professor, writer, but as usual, the introduction of our speaker is up to Amos Bianchi, Professor Amos Bianchi, that is with me the co-curator of this special public program, Media Explosion. Very quickly, today we have a double honor, if I can, because we have with us Stefano Boeri, President of La Triennale di Milano, and also the Dean and Rector of New Academy of Fine Arts, Guido Tattoni, for an institutional greeting. So if I can, I would like to start immediately with Stefano. And I would like also to say thanks personally to Stefano, to Guido, and to Amos for the possibility to be a curator of this public program that, as you know, today is the last seminar of this amazing experience of cooperation, La Triennale di Milano and New Academy of Fine Arts. Thanks, Stefano, and it's up to you. Thanks very much.
So thanks, Leonardo. So on behalf of the Milano Triennale, I would like to express my great satisfaction in hosting today the thought of Lev Manovich and his crucial reflection on the future of culture, media, and in this hopefully post-pandemic phase. I also want to thank Leonardo for having built this opportunity, and NABA, Nuova Accademia di Belle, Arti, and its director Guido Tattoni and Amos Bianchi for allowing us to start a collaboration that I'm sure it will be more and more intense. Thank you so much, and Lev, I'm so happy to see you. Thank you.
Thank you to Stefano Boeri. I also would like to say something before we start. I don't want to steal too much time from this lecture that all of you are waiting for. This is the last of the lecture series we have organized with Triennale Media Explosion around the human. We had Joanna Zeniska, we had Stefano Quintarelli, Margaret Atwood. Today we have the pleasure to hear Lev Manovich. This kind of meetings set itself in a context in which NABA is a forward-looking academy. It was born 40 years ago with the idea of working with the academic tradition and employing a more contemporary language. And 40 years later, we still embody that sentiment, and we wonder what's going to be the next contemporary language, what's going to be culture in 10, 20, 40 years. So today's lecture really fits perfectly our academic intent that we continue doing in class every day. So we even have a whole study area, the new technology of fine arts, that Professor Bianchi leads, that is even more involved in experimenting how art, products, events, technologies are going to be in the future, and to explore and inquire in, what's the relationship between all these entities, what's going to be around these factors, and how human beings will interact with them. So analog digital ecosystems, human and non-human entities indifferently, with which we will going to interface more and more organic and inorganic elements with smoothly, let's say, very smoothly and seamlessly, that's the word. So that's how today's lecture is really perfectly fit in this research context that we bring forward every day with our practice. And Manovich's perspective is certainly welcome and interesting for our students that I see very numerous in the audience, so thank you. And also the general public, people that are not our students, that I also see. Very short time more for some thanks, as this is the last of these encounters. Obviously, I would like to thank very deeply Triennale and Stefano Boeri for the hospitality and the partnership we had in organizing this series of events. Also, Damiano Gulli, who really actively cooperated with us in realizing those 4 meetings. Professor Bianchi, Professor Caffo, for curating those lectures. Our communication office with Francesca Zocchi and Ginevra Stuto for taking care of all the organizational part and the communication, and Ilaria for the digital department. Our guests, our students, and all of you who are so numerously participating to these classes. So thank you very much. I'll pass it on to Professor Bianchi and enjoy today's class. Thank you.
So, thank you very much, Guido. Just very few words. Just to say, I graduated in philosophy more than 20 years ago. And then I moved to media studies and communication studies. And I just want to say that the encounter with the language of new media in 2001, a very grounding book about the contemporary culture of digital media, written by Lev Manovich in 2001, was a fundamental meeting. Was for me the opportunity to review an understanding of what media were at that time, by some new reflection deriving from the appearance of such a big paradigm that's the digital world. And in the last years, I've been following a lot the other production by Lev Manovich. I'm referring to software text command, to aesthetics of artificial intelligence, and the very recent cultural analytics. Culture and analytics, two words that sometimes, you know, when you come from the field of humanities, they seem not related. We feel they are not related. But at the opposite, I hope that by this lecture, that's whose title, How to Predict the Future of Culture, is so meaningful, Lev Manovich will reveal us his approach to this topic, and his approach by which he is able to combine humanities and numbers, let me say, in one unique theoretical reflection. I just want to add one thing. Lev Manovich is famous worldwide as a theoretician, but he is also an artist, he's also a designer, he's also a person who in his classes, experiments, put in practice his theories. He's one of the persons in the world who is able to provide us some ideas, some new meaningful ideas about medias, both from the practical perspective and from the purely theoretical one. And that's the kind of approach we try to carry out in our Academy of Fine Arts. So I leave immediately room to Professor Manovich. I hope our audience to enjoy this conference, and you have that button, Q&A. Please write any question you like to raise to our very welcome guest. Thank you, Professor Manovich. I leave
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much for this invitation. You know, I just yelled at all the people who invited me because I couldn't find the email with the link. So I hope you'll forgive me. But it's like a ultimate horror, right, of a Zoom era is you can't find the link. I want to say that I'm deeply honored and I'm nervous because I'm in front of really my heroes. But I have, you know, some maybe good news for all of us. Recently, I realized that I do have quite a number of people who are interested in what I'm doing in Milan, in Italy, including Milan. I think maybe because Italy is, out of all countries today, is the one which is still very interested and take very seriously aesthetics. But aesthetics is not just about beauty or decoration. It's not about wallpaper. It's a way which makes us human, right? We humans had paintings and songs and dance tens of thousands of years ago, before we had language, law, philosophy, and business, right? About 70,000 years ago, before Microsoft Excel. And I think Italians are the ones who understand it. But the good news is that I just was invited a few weeks ago to spend maybe 2 months next May and June, so not this year, but the following year, as a guest of University of Turin. And I hope, you know, I said yes, of course, immediately. So I hope that things will be okay by next summer, and then I'll be able to spend more time, and of course, you know, plenty of beautiful cafes to visit in Milan, and amazing people to be stimulated from. I don't know if I'll have time to get into it, but what I just spent 15 years doing, which is trying to figure out if we can use computers to understand the explosion of contemporary culture and to be able to see all the creativity, including work with students, something which I call cultural analytics. The key idea actually came from a meeting I had in Milan in May of 2005 when I visited, unfortunately, I don't remember his name at the moment, a very famous Italian designer, industrial designer, and I saw his work where he was trying to take 100 most successful models of chairs, right, designed in the 20th century, and put them in a kind of 6-dimensional space. I said, oh my God. So this kind of multi-dimensional spaces, which I also use in business, can be a new way to visualize, make sense, and create more inclusive cultural histories. So as I understand, this lecture is aimed at students. And in fact, this new topic, which I've been developing since last fall, how to predict and think about culture in 10, 20, 30 years from now, I'm developing this topic with students. So I first taught a seminar for the best, most Western Russian university last fall, Russian School of Economics, where I had the best students I've ever had in my life. And now I'm teaching it also at University of Tel Aviv. So instead of my usual slides, in a second I will share a screen. And in fact, I'll be sharing with you the same class materials I'm using in my class. So I'll be taking it from a class. So you'll get like a very compressed version of this class in about 40 minutes. So far, I had the opportunity to teach it over 6 or 8 weeks. Great. Okay. All right. Perfect. Okay. So the idea for this topic came to me, in fact, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, when I realized that we're surrounded by institutions, companies, non-governmental organizations, consultants, who are in the business of predicting the future, but the future which we talk about somehow never includes culture. Right? So science fiction movies and novels, NGOs, think tanks, and many others make predictions about the future, but these predictions seem to only concern social and economic aspects of human life, technology, space travel, the impact of climate change, countries' economies, population growth, and so on. In fact, we are never told what kind of culture we may have decades from now. Fashion, literature, cinema, social media, visual art, theater, performance, all these wonderful things which makes us human are absent from these predictions. And when people do want to think about cultural future, we seem to always focus on technology, right? In fact, there is probably expectations from some of you, but I'll be talking today about technology because many people have this wrong idea that Lev Manovich is the one who writes about technology, whereas I'm one who writes about art. The reason I focused on new media, like some of us 25 years ago, is that that was a new kind of means to make new statics, to create space and time. If it was 100 years ago, I would be working in film, photography, X-rays, fax, and probably would be assistant to Maholinage and Bauhaus, right? But now new media is no longer new. We have to think ahead. And why is it important not to spend too much time to think about future culture in relation to technology? Because technology never really matters. It never completely determines the kind of culture we have, right? Yes, people connected, we shift to capitalism, to development of Renaissance perspective, but it doesn't determine all the varieties, all the variability, all the poetics of perspective we saw among various Italian painters in the 15th, 16th, 17th century. Yes, certainly the film and photography were using technologies over time. The 20th century cinema was based on 19th century technology of electricity and electric motor. But again, right, even though we see the technologies has influenced the arts and culture, we never completely determined the full variety, the full breadth, the full richness of human aesthetics, the narratives, the spaces, the times, the looks, and so on. Yes, Impressionist painters were made possible, perhaps, by the development of a new technology of oil paints, but we don't want to be like vulgar Marxist, and we don't want to say that culture, aesthetics, art is completely driven by technology. So that's why when I teach this class, I tell my students, I don't want you to think about VR, ER, robots, AI, and so on. Of course, it will be present. Of course, you can't get rid of it. It's going to be this noise that will be buzzing in your head, because it's impossible today to open any source of media and not to have news about it. And I myself read daily news about new advances in machine learning, because I think it's very, very important for culture. But precisely because this is so easy to think about future culture in relation to technology, I don't want us to do it. So having made this as a kind of requirement, we can say, right? We can say, if we don't think about technology, right? What else can we think about? So here's some examples of what I develop and see as topics for this future, let's say, sci-fi digital humanities, so to speak. So one is we can think about speed of change. Is the speed of change we see in the 21st century is indeed different from the speed of change in the last 150 years. Around 99, many people thought that the speed of change in the 21st century will be about 1,000 times faster. Well, I don't really see it, except maybe in the relentless development of computer chips and deeper and deeper neural networks, but definitely not in culture. So we can ask, why do particular historical periods see the accelerated speed in lots of cultural innovation? For me, for example, probably the most important period of cultural innovation in modern history was between 1907 and 1932, when within a few years, people working across all the different art forms and also across things which we named design. We also invented design. These people invented new languages for representing space and time, new communication principles. We refused, for example, symmetry, right? We focused on asymmetry, dynamism, new typography, new principles for architecture, and so on and so forth. And then I think the second equally creative period perhaps was 56 to about 71. And I think the tragedy of our own period is we have amazing technology, amazing communication, and yet intellectually, the kind of discussions we have about arts and culture are way more primitive than what we had in fact on television, even 40 years ago. So can we quantify the speed of cultural change, the speed of cultural innovation? And if we quantify it, can we perhaps even predict when cultural innovations will accelerate next time? Scale. So scale is another very important concept. It's obvious to me, or at least from my point of view, the single most important dimension of social, cultural, technological change in the last 30 years is the scale. So in 1990, in fact, 30 years ago, we still live in a Cold War era. In 91, the Soviet Union dissolves. The Cold War officially ends, at least for 30 years. Maybe now it's coming back. And hundreds of millions of people in China, Vietnam, Eastern Europe, and other post-communist countries join the global world. Right, there's new scale of travel, discount airlines, the telecommunication becomes eventually kind of free, and we have hundreds of millions of new people who join the global world of consumption, leisure, and culture. But not only that, right? So not only we have today, billions of people posting billions of cultural artifacts, images, and so on Instagram, Facebook, etc. But the scale of professional cultural production have also increased tremendously in this last 30 years. Think about all the new art schools, design schools, film schools, and so on, both physical ones and all the endless programs today which exist online, right? All the places you can take classes, Skillshare, Coursera, and so on. Think about all the new biennales, Kunsthalles, Fashion Week, Design Week, and so on. So both in terms of, like to say, amateur cultural production, consumption, remixing, and participation, and also in terms of professionals, the scale of contemporary cultural world has increased tremendously in the last 30 years. So has this increased globalization, this increased interconnectivity led to a new kind of cultural renaissance? I'm not sure. And what in general, more theoretically, we can ask is the effect of a scale on culture. Maybe perhaps was something nice about, for example, the Cold War era, because you had one system in the kind of capitalist Western world with its own ideas, and you had another system in so-called communist world. They communicated, but they didn't completely follow each other. So how can I understand more theoretically the effects of a scale, the numbers of creators and audiences on content and forms of culture? I mean, what is the size of a cultural audience in Milan, in 1700, 1900, or 2000? In 1870, 1860s, at the time of Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, and so on, were only about 300,000 people living in St. Petersburg. So, it was this kind of pre-Facebook era, so to speak. What was the size of people in 1925 participating in this avant-garde reinvention of communication languages? And another aspect of scale is probably the single most important development of the last 20 years, which is the growth of global middle class. Right? In the last 25 years, the size of global middle class grew up a few times, and mostly this growth, of course, is taking place in Asia. And the internet and social media now allow instant global distribution of new cultural works. So we have both scale in terms of quantities of people, quantities of artifacts, and also the scale of distribution. So how do such developments affect content, form, and aesthetics? So a couple of more dimensions, and of course there are many others, but this is just the ones I find I'm more interested in. Question of identity. So contemporary society tells us that we need to express our uniqueness and be creative. You have to create, it's the name of one of the endless, beautiful, fashion stores in Seoul. I pass by when we go over every couple of weeks. I didn't mention that for the last year, we've been living in Korea. My wife is from here, she's in performing arts. And of course, Asia is now, by far the most advanced aesthetically part of the world. So for me, it's very natural to think about the trends I see here. So at the same time, the society offers us ready-to-use elements and templates to create our identities, from fast fashion to Instagram filters, PowerPoint templates, various objects you have in 3D software, and so on and so forth. So how can we expect this contradiction to play in the future? On the one hand, the mandate to be unique, to express your uniqueness, at the same time to fashion this uniqueness out of pre-existing elements and templates. And then we can say, bringing a bit more business language to that, how far we can expect customization and localization of products and services to develop in the coming decades, right? Now I go to Amazon webpage. Amazon webpage, every time I go, it gets customized because we have my data, so they recommend me different books, but the aesthetics of the page stays the same, right? Why? Even if in digital world, the aesthetics is not customized according to my aesthetic taste and preferences, obviously it's not happening in the physical world, right? So we still live more or less in a society governed by 19th century idea of mass production, right? Despite the fact that we have millions of cable channels, right? Billions of Facebook groups and so on, aesthetically, we're still somewhere in the 19th century. And now that we are at the word aesthetics, which is my favorite one. I first wrote about aesthetics in relation to Instagram in my book, Instagram, A Contemporary Image, which I've written over a few weeks when we were in a small village in Thailand. So I was able to focus, and then I published it online, and it's now translated in Japanese and coming out in Italian. And then I introduced this idea of aesthetic society, which of course should be very obvious to Italy, but at least in the English language, I couldn't really find anybody using this term. So I said, okay, I'm going to introduce this term aesthetic society. And now I'm developing a new book, which is also focusing on this term. And I define aesthetic society as the society where aesthetics design, artistic modernist creativity, originality, innovation play a key role, both symbolically and economically. So these concepts have become core values of a whole society, as opposed to being available to only selected social groups, such as upper classes and professional artists. Right? A different way to say it is to say that in aesthetic society, which to me begins to develop in a modern period around 1996, 1997. So 96 we have Wallpaper magazine, right? 97 we have Colette in Paris, the first design store. Even later we have this kind of minimalism coming from Japan. And now I'm in Korea, right, where every 50 meters there's a cafe with better design, with top design hotels in Europe or America, right? I mean, the level of aesthetic sophistication, what I call 200 shades of gray, the whisper of differences between elements is very sophisticated in Korea. And it wasn't like this 10 years ago. So it's not some kind of traditional Korean aesthetics. No, it's something else. But where else this sophistication is going to go in the next 10, 20, 30 years? Sound, touch, smell, and so on. So a different way to put it is to say that this values of originality, creativity, make it new innovation, which in the 20th century we used to associate with a particular professional group of professionally trained artists. And these values, let's say, were available to upper classes, because as you know, in the 19th century, people criticized industrial production because it didn't offer the sophistication. But now in the last 25 years, it became available pretty much to everybody, right? So everybody buys the same phone and it offers the same sophistication. If you're a billionaire, you can't spend $1 billion on a phone against something more sophisticated, right? So your basic iPhone or your basic, Huawei, is basically has pretty much the same surface as a more expensive phone, so everybody gets the same sophisticated product. So in the modern period, these values start coming to the center, as I said, after the middle of 1990s, and there are many accompanying developments. So the reason I'm talking about all this, these 4 dimensions is not that they're interesting or not by themselves, but I think these examples of kind of dimensions, we can ask about how these dimensions are going to change, how culture is going to change, along with dimensions in the next 20, 30 years, and also can we make some quantitative predictions. The growth of global middle class, we can predict. The emergence of experience economy, we now live 20 years in experience economy. The commercialization of a cool, hip, avant-garde, and experimental. This begins in the first part of the 1980s. New manufacturing methods, new materials, and adoption of digital technologies all contribute to the development of aesthetic societies. So when you can say what levels of aestheticization of everyday life may reach by 2050. And I'm just going to come back to your frontal face for a second, because we all have seen too many slide lectures. And what I want to say a bit like paradoxically, right? Forget about the digital. Digital is the past. There is nothing aesthetically interesting about the digital. The fact that we're now living our life in front of the screens, 20, 30 years from now, we're going to look with spirit with big shame. Why did we spend all our best times of our lives in these digital prisons? And this is not to say that I'm Luddite, of course not. I make my living by talking about computers in the future. But what I'm trying to say is that the sensorial, the physical, the relational, right? The whole wealth of human senses, which is we experience, right, and we use in communication. And our media until 19th century was more or less using the senses, right? Even something like using paper and a typewriter, right? With a certain physicality to it. Right, we're in this very particular period where everybody looking at the small, tiny screen, and all the screens are the same. We all made from rectangular pixels. This is really a dark middle. This is really, I would call, digital Middle Ages, and this is going to go away. Trust me, 10, 15 years, or maybe 20 years maximum, we'll have some new sensorial, three-dimensional, holographic, but also very material interfaces. And this is one thing I predict, that in 30 years, we may still have images, we'll probably have video, although most of creativity probably will move into three-dimensional sphere, the kind of holographic. But I think the screen will have to change. Otherwise, people will just, don't want to live in this kind of culture. Okay, so that's kind of like one approach to think about the future, looking at this very broad economic, social, media changes over the last 30 years, the end of Cold War, the beginning of experience economy, the design wave, the rise of global middle class. And the nice thing about it is that we can predict some of things, right? We can predict, for example, what are going to be the biggest global cities 20, 30 years from now. We can predict more or less the demographic structure of society. And then perhaps, the fact that we'll have these predictions, the fact that we have these numbers, perhaps we can use it to think about culture. But now let me show you a second approach. I will not have time to talk about third approach, which is looking at the modern art, design, architecture, filmmaking, and focusing on the work of avant-garde designers, architects, filmmakers, writers, and so on. People like the Russian so-called constructivists in places like Bauhaus, but more importantly, places like Futimas, which some was a more important theoretically and practically design school in Russia between 1990 and 1929. In fact, we were the first ones, not the Bauhaus people, to introduce this idea that the artists should become designers and define new aesthetics of industrial society. I mean, Bauhaus only got this idea, I think, by 24. So I can talk about it, in the last 5 to 10 years, more and more materials are being published and exhibited about 1920s, 1930s in Russia. And like many people, I'm realizing that everything you know about Russian avant-garde is a tip of the iceberg. And there is so much where there are so many ideas which are completely innovative, which I hope we'll see realized in the next 10 to 20, 30 years. Like, I'll just give you one example. So in 2019, I was lucky to be in Moscow 5 times, and I saw the pioneering exhibition about the first Museum of Modern Art. What do you think was the first Museum of Modern Art? It was in New York? Of course not. Americans steal everything, right? Americans steal these ideas, and they tell you that we were first. Of course not. The first Museum of Modern Art was formed in Moscow in 1919. All of avant-garde artists, Malevich, Tatlin, Kandinsky, were part of this museum. And this museum was still very innovative. It's still more innovative than anything we have today because it was a museum run by artists. Artists are making decisions what works to buy. And it was a museum which was conceived not as a place to archive and exhibit things, but as a place of research. And they put for themselves 4 goals. One is to figure out what to collect. Shall we collect particular artists, like Cezanne, right? Leading up to Malevich, right? We're only particular avant-garde artists, or shall we collect everybody? It's an interesting question, right? Why does museum should buy everything? Just because it costs money, right? The second thing was how to scientifically organize exhibition practice. What are the different principles to use in exhibiting a work? So Malevich, for example, said that works should be exhibited not according to the chronology, but according to the contrast, the way he arranges elements in his supremacist compositions. The third thing was to actually have artists in residence. Can you imagine 1919 artists in residence in a museum run by artists to help his artists develop new art for the future? And the fourth thing was to establish a new scientific study of art, what we now call digital humanities or cultural analytics. We had this idea. We started in 1923. For example, we would study art history according to some scientific principles. We would also study using psychology the effect of different installation methods on perception. We had a lab, and then of course, 1929, everything was closed. So this is why, right, I'm going back to Russian avant-garde, because I see so much where, which is still very revolutionary, but still hasn't been realized. But what I want to do is, we started a bit late, so I think I can have another 10 minutes, right, 10, 15 minutes. I want to introduce a third approach to think about the future, which is more directly connected to what I've been focusing on in the last 15 years, which is so-called cultural analytics, connected to digital humanities, digital art history, computational humanities, culturenomics, all these things which mean approximately the same thing, which is looking at the culture as data and using data science methods as a way to study culture. And what people were able to do in the last 5, 10 years in these fields is to get hold, right, create certain large cultural data sets. For example, 500,000 popular songs in the last 60 years, 10,000 movies over 100 years, right? 2 million paintings, even use the kind of visualization and data science methods and be able to reveal certain long-term patterns which quantify cultural development. So now that this work is becoming more mainstream, right? Digital humanities is becoming too popular. I said, okay, Lev, you were one of the pioneers of this work in relation to visual images. Now it's becoming popular. Let's do something else, right? When the field becomes successful, I can try to move on. So I said, maybe I can apply these methods to think about the future. So I will show you just in the last next 10 minutes, very briefly, examples of this work. And this work is not talking about the future, but it's showing us the cultural past, let's say last 100 years or sometimes longer, in a new quantitative fashion. And while this is probably not going to be by itself enough to give us really profound, deep, amazing visions of culture in 2040, 2050, it's very interesting, right? Because you can say, okay, if these trends develop, what kind of music remixes we'll have 10 years from now? If this trend develops, what's going to be the structure of film editing 10 years from now, right? Can we also anticipate, for example, what happens to remix? Is remix going to continue govern the modern culture for the next 20 years? So let me show you a few examples. And then we'll have time for discussion, I hope. Okay. So here we go, okay. Just a moment. Okay, here we go. Yes. So by the way, I will copy this link. I will actually edit. I put like a Facebook announcement of this lecture, so I will add this link there. So all this stuff is online, so you can basically read all these materials. So very few things, right? So this is a work from 2012, where what we've done is we created a data set of 120,000 important cultural figures. And we basically visualized the birth and death places of these figures. And then we see this very interesting idea of culture as a history of cultural migration, right? So people first we focus on Italy, then it goes to Asia, then it goes to America, etc., etc., etc. So one color corresponds to like where a person was born in red, even blue, right, where a person died, and it's basically looking at the data for about 600 centuries. Sorry, I'm just going very quickly, and you get this very, very interesting idea of culture through the birth and death places and places and dates of like tens of thousands of individuals, right? So this is again maybe not directly applicable to the future, but it gives us the idea. So for example, inspired by this, I would like to do a study hypothetically, because I don't think I would ever be able to do it, is to take like 10, 20, 30 leading design, architecture, film schools, such as yours, or let's say the architecture school at Columbia University, and be able to track the movement geographically and professionally of all the graduates in the last 30 years, because it will give us a great picture of globalization, right? And how ideas get diffused from these places to the rest of the world, right? So this is one example. Oops, just a moment. What did I? Okay, sorry. Sorry. Okay, shoot this. Sorry, I closed by mistake. So this is something else. This one, yeah. So this is actually from my own lab from like 12 years ago. This was one of the first things we have done. We got a hold of all the covers of Time magazine. So Time is a very important illustrated American picture magazine, started to become out in 1923. And using very simple software, which I wrote myself, we created some visualizations where we took all the covers of this magazine and we organized them left to right, top to bottom in order of publication from 1923 until now. And I'm going to skip analysis, but I found about 14 different trends within which you see on the surface of a transition from black and white to color, and there are different color periods, and there's a shift from painting to photography, etc., etc. But you also see certain changes in meaning and in semiotics of communications. In the beginning, it's so portraits of particular people, and background is completely semiotically neutral. It doesn't communicate anything. And then at a certain point, right, we start seeing these covers where image becomes illustration. It talks about some ideas or concepts, the way portraits, for example, function maybe in the 17th, 18th century. And then in the 1990s and 2000s, right, we have the third paradigm where we have either portraits, again, which are very neutral, or we have covers which don't feature people, but but feature some concept. So what you have is with very different modalities, right? Different semiotic regime of communication. But the nice thing about visualizations is you see that we don't change overnight, right? That this changes in proportion between one another is very gradual. So let's say by 1925, all the covers, right, are covers of people. And then slowly you start seeing these covers which have some kind of semiotic background with some meanings. Even let's say by 2010, there's maybe 40% of these covers. So it's a very gradual change which take place over the course of decades, right? And then we also did other visualizations where we, for example, measure visual properties of this cover. So here we measured average saturation. Again, some this work, so I'm showing it very briefly. And what you see is that the covers which are almost black and white at the bottom, the covers which are most colorful on the top. And again, you have this very gradual wave-like patterns. And it also shows you how difficult it is, right, to predict culture, because things, right, keep going up and up and up, right? And you think that we will continue, but here you see the variability becomes small in the 70s, partly maybe because of this kind of new generation, right, after the expansion of the 1960s, and it kind of coincides with the oil crisis in the West, right? And then things go up again, and then they go down. So it also shows you how it may be very hard to predict cultural history, and that's why it's so tempting, right? I like to do things which are impossible. And then here's another example. So it's a work of a psychologist from Cornell University, James Cutting, and his student. He's been doing it for over 25 years. They got a database of about 10,000 films, mostly Americans, but also some Europeans. And what we do is we measure various attributes of his films, even see how his attributes change over time. So here we took, right, around 9,400 English language films, and each film is represented as a point. And then the X, right, position of a point is the time when the film was released, and Y position is the average shot length, right? So we see in the beginning, the average shot length is about 15 seconds. Even by 2010, right, it's almost 3 times less. It's about 4 seconds. And then we see some very interesting challenges, right? Because the data has this high variability. It's not clear what is the best way to fit the data. And depending on how you fit the data, right, that's why we need to learn a bit of statistics. You get a different idea of cultural history because you can fit it as a straight line, or you can fit it as this curve, which will say things are accelerating after 1970. And also, if you break it, for example, into European films and American films, so it turns out, sorry, this is, this is something else. Somewhere it's here. So it turns out European films are changing much more slowly. So of course, there's a danger when you aggregate too much data and you don't differentiate it, right? So you can say, okay, so how fast the films are going to be by 2050? But that's also not so simple, but eventually we're going to run, right, into the limits of human cognition and reception. So there's also very interesting work about where you can actually quantitatively see the emergence of postmodernism in cinema through big data. There's very interesting work about the emergence of literary diction. I'll just show very briefly from Ted Underwood, perhaps the most interesting American theorist of digital humanities. So here we're looking at basically thousands of texts from a few centuries, in English, and by coming up with a very interesting measure, which is proportion of words which appear in this text, which entered the English language before 1150 versus after, we see this very interesting separation. So black line is a fit curve for normal nonfiction prose, and then poetry is this purple line, and this is the prose. So you can see how in the beginning, right, before literature in the modern sense has emerged, there is not much difference in terms of language use between these 3 different types of texts. but slowly become more and more differentiated. And it makes sense, right? That poetry is more differentiated and prose is somewhere in the middle. And, so then of course you also wonder if it's going to continue, right? So that's an example of how you can look at certain aspects of literature. Finally, I just want to show you one last thing. And then I think we'll have time for questions, I hope. Just a second. I think it's here. Yeah, the students ask me for readings. I give them some readings. And let me just see where okay, here it is, yeah. Okay, just want to show you the last thing. So since I've been living and visiting Korea for many years, as you know, Korean popular culture, TV drama, music, so-called K-pop is one of the leading, right, cultural industries in the world, right? More people watch K-pop in Hollywood or Bollywood, and it's very, very sophisticated. So I was trying to figure out, what makes it so sophisticated, and again, can we also predict, for example, how music videos are going to develop? And I found this just one video by somebody in, like I think, professional editor. So just somebody in LA. He says basically what he realized when he started to analyze K-pop videos. He said many Western music videos may just feature 2-3 scenes. You just cut back and forth in front of them. Like he said, the Korean ones, they may have 40-50 different scenes. And like he said, the reason these videos are so beautiful is they're very complex. And even if the same kind of stage appears more than once, you don't realize it. So here again, you have a very interesting dimension, which is the changes in visual complexity. And again, you can wonder where it's going to go. And eventually, are we going to run against the limits of human cognition and perception? Or will we kind of learn to somehow enjoy videos or which are maybe of, I don't know, 900 frames per second, and every frame is a different scene. Who knows? Yeah, so he basically says visual complexity is what in fact makes these videos beautiful. And we'll just play it for a couple of few seconds, and then we'll go to discussion. So it keeps changing, right? Anyway. Right. So 23 performance setups for one video, right? So this is it. Of course, I was only able to scratch the surface or scratch the surface of the surface, but that's enough. So I think the take-home points is that it's a good idea to try to predict the future, because if you're now 20 or 22, 23, I'm talking about the students, in 30, 40 years, right, you'll just be in the kind of prime of your career. And in my own work, I think I was able to predict some aspects of the future from time to time, right? So in 1982, I realized that in fact I should probably focus my work on digital media because one day it'll be important. In 84, maybe only 40 people were working in computer animation. In 93, I was the first person to make the website and basically started publishing everything I wrote on the website. So I made my career from a website and so forth, right? So I'm not sure what methods I used, right? They were definitely not quantitative, but it's good to be able to predict the future, even in the next 5 to 10 years, not talking about 30 or 40, is a way to kind of focus your career. And of course, it's also very interesting to us. And one of the reasons I kind of want us to think about it is I'm a bit tired of what I call presentism, right? Presentism of human culture, right? Everything is about what happened in the last 5 seconds. And now every single cultural institution wants to give panels and do exhibitions about COVID-19, right? After 2 weeks of being in isolation, some artists start making exhibitions. Oh my God, I'm sitting in isolation. To me, it's a bit small scale, right? So I kind of want young people to think on the scale of 10, 20, 30 years, and also to think about other things besides climate change, besides the fact that we'll have no jobs because all the jobs will be in Asia or given to AI. to try to bring back this kind of longer term perspective, which I think humanities used to have and sometimes still have, and also to make people realize that, you know, technology is not everything, right? What kind of novels we're going to read or literary works we're going to read in 2050. Yeah, even if its works are written by computers, they're written for us, right? So where aesthetics, you know, where plots, where narration descriptions will not be just about technology. That what cyberpunk was in the 1980s. It already happened, right? So this is my new project, and as you can see, it's a way to also unite some of my previous interests and to go forward. And it's also a way to ask a completely impossible question. And I think we have to ask impossible questions. And also that's my message to the students, because if you set your goal to be up there, you'll never get there, but you can jump up to here. And if you set your goal here, you will not even jump that high, right? So I think it's a good idea to only work on impossible questions. And being in university, I have this liberty to do that. So I hope you'll have a few questions for me, and thank you so much for your attention.
I'm the one who thank you, Professor Manovich, for your very, very inspiring and challenging presentation. And okay, the Q&A session is open, but I start with the first question. Data science. You quoted data science and you applied data science in your work and in cultural analytics, your last publication. We have a lot of it in order to understand the contemporary phenomena. My question is this one. In this moment, for designer, here we have an audience mostly made by designers. Is data science a skill a contemporary designer should have?
Yeah. So first of all, let me say a couple of things about design. And sorry I didn't mention it, but you know I couldn't mention everything. You know, I want to keep you guys. I want to lock the door and keep you for the next 3 days. All right. So so you know what I wanted to do, but I kind of like was a bit nervous that I lost the link. Is to start by thinking about how world was different 30 years ago, right? People didn't use internet yet, only academics, no web, Cold War. We still have like half a world locked in communism. People still think about postmodernism is the latest thing, and now nobody remembers it, right? And so on and so forth. But what's more interesting for us, when you think about design today, half of the design fields did not exist. Interaction design, user experience design. Yes, of course, we had, you know, we had spatial design. Maybe it wasn't as important for space design, web design, always different, right? I mean, the game design, all these different design fields emerged between 95 and 98. I remember I was sitting in LA and a person like in front of me said, okay, I'm going to postulate this new field called experience design. And most of these fields emerged because we shift to computers. We shift to computers or experience economy. So this is what designers have to think about, that you know maybe half of the design fields which will exist 30 years from now don't even exist today. So shall we learn about data science, AI, computers? Of course, because this is one of the key driving forces of modern society. And if we can understand how computers, internet, data analysis, artificial intelligence, machine learning are going to be changing society, we're going to be ahead. So it's not just a question, shall we have it as a skill? We should have it so we can make some sense of where contemporary world is going, right? The second thing is data science is a skill. What does it mean? I think to me, data science, it's maybe less of a skill. It's more like attitude. Yeah? So what I'm trying to do in this project is to say, you know, for thousands of years, you know, the humans thought about cultural history, present. Well, we didn't think about future maybe until 19th century, qualitatively, and it worked very well. In the late 19th century, we have emergence of so-called social sciences, which try to think about society quantitatively, and it works in some ways. And now we have a next stage, right, which is development of these disciplines, including my own little contribution, which is a kind of quantitative look at human culture, and it's not going to go away, right? And to me, it's attitude. So now when I want to think about anything, my first intuition is, can I also look at this quantitatively? Because probably the existing views are wrong. So if I think about Vincent van Gogh, right, the most canonical artist, and when I get his paintings, when I analyze them, and when I realize that everything we know about Van Gogh is wrong. For example, his most famous paintings are his least typical, right? So the point is, of course, not to say that quantification, data gathering, statistics, and so on is going to replace all our methods. Of course not, but it becomes now a possibility. And I think especially for designers who also have other methods, right? I mean, we can have people write questionnaires, we have focus groups, we have ethnography, and so on. But with big data, right, has really opened a new paradigm for designers, right? I mean, you all know about A/B testing and so on and so forth. So it is a skill, but we also have to think about the limits, right, of big data. That what people are going to tell you, the way people behave online is not necessarily what we really think. And we also have to think about the limits of contemporary data science, which is focusing on the digital data. But I think the future of understanding human reception and interaction is what happens here, right? So it's MRI, EEG, eye movements, and development of more sophisticated technologies, which can allow us to perhaps have a bit more window into what happens inside the brain and the body, but not on the scale of 10 people who go inside the MRI machine, but on the scale of billions of people, right? So, so I hope I gave you a few arguments why we should learn a bit about data science, and if we can learn more, we should learn even more.
Absolutely, yes, thank you. I go on with a second question. We have a question from our audience. Will climate change crisis compromise the creation forms of culture? I mean, is going to this huge crisis to be a turning point in the production of future culture?
Right, sure. So, this is the difference, I think, also today and 30 years ago. Of course, we know that some very smart people were already thinking about, the possible climate change and the effect of industrialization as early as 1960s and 1970s, right? The famous book Silent Spring. But most of us were not. So in fact, 30 years ago was a very optimistic moment, right? The Berlin Wall falls down, everybody kisses, and the new global consumers, right, join the scene. And today we live under this kind of shadow, right, of climate change. How much it's going to affect, compromise, as you said, or inspire human creativity, human life, it's very hard to say. When we look at the past, we have these very dark moments, right? Like a Black Death, right? Basically, all until recently, many countries or sometimes like whole regions, right, had a huge health, economic, demographic crises. Again, think about what happens in 1918 in Europe. Something like 50 million people died. And only now we realize how visible it was and how much it affected things. And yet sometimes the spirits were also most creative, right, in the human history. So perhaps we live now in this very comfortable life, everything is working, we have Zooms, right? And thinking about the kind of disruption which was COVID-19 has created, right, in culture, and how, of course, for people, especially performing arts, it was very painful. But also for many people, museums and so on, we started to do this online events. And for me, I'm going to say something terrible. Last year was one of the best years of my life because I'm sitting in one place, I'm not traveling. I was very lucky in Korea, nothing got locked. And all my friends now have time, right, to talk to me on Zoom. And it's a beautiful life, like what we have now. And maybe I wouldn't be able to come, or you wouldn't invite me if things were physical. So I think we can think about every crisis as opportunity, not just to kind of quail back, right, and to become secure in our old ways of doing things, but to rethink things and to become more creative. So this is optimist in me, and the pessimist in me, okay, let's put him outside the door. Let's be a bit optimistic. So I think for many fields, many institutions will use any excuse to become more conservative, whereas others will use any excuse to become more creative. So it depends on what side of the barricades, if you're a young student, you want to end up with. So draw your conclusions and go over it.
So Professor Manovich, first of all, can you hear me? Okay, so good. We have another question of our public, but first of all, I would like to ask you something. I'm not sure if this is a good question, but it's just an intuition that I have after your talk. If I understand, so you think that this is also the thesis of your paper, Computer Vision, Human Sense, a Language of Art, was published by...
Right.
Okay, so I think that let me know if it's true that your idea is that the numerical representation of data analysis, it's a sort of new language for describing cultural artifact, experience, dynamics, and that the human language, like, I don't know, Italian or English, okay, it's not enough to describe this kind of experience of humanity, no? And in some sense, I think that the thesis of your paper and of your research is that we have a sort of universal language that we can try to use today to describe something. I don't know if it's true, or a language that is more of a natural language, like, I don't know, Italiano or English or Russian or something like that. So I would like to ask you, who is the public of this universal language? Okay, because I think that this is the core problem of your argument, because in some sense it's true that English or Italiano, or I don't know, it's not enough to describe human experience now, but it's clear who is the public of Italiano, no?
I understand. I think I understand your question.
Okay.
So Leonardo, you basically, as we say in English, you killed me, because this is actually one of the most important questions, right? So so let's say, approximately 2,000 years ago, or maybe 1,000 years ago, right? Ancient Greece or ancient Arab worlds, people start to use math, right? And then the science really gets underway in Renaissance, and the scientists adopt data, what we now call data visualization, right? Graphs, Cartesian space, right? Visual functions and the numbers as a new meta language to talk about the universe. And it allows them to measure things, and it allows them to formulate laws, like Newton's laws, in quantitative forms, right? Very good. Okay, how many people work in science today? Tens of millions, but not everybody. Okay. So then, late 19th century, we have emergence of so-called social science, which as Brun Latour pointed out, right, was this very almost futile, perhaps, attempt to make the study of society also scientific and to emulate the science too much, samples, and so on and so forth. Well, how many people speak the language of social science? It's hard to say. Not so few, because every day you open what I call newspaper, but I mean, you open your Twitter, right? You open your news channel, and we talk about, okay, votes or questionnaires, or the effect of coronavirus, or the effect of different vaccines, and we use language of statistics, right? We talk about bias, we talk about not a big enough sample, we talk about percentage. So at least on some basic level, the language of social science, which is the language of social statistics, has become the common language, right? So things are not so bad. And then, of course, you look at contemporary moment, you can see, of course, everybody in China, all the high school students, we get computer science, we get math, and that's probably one of the reasons why we're doing so well. And people have to learn math and computer science if you're going to have any jobs, right? So from that point of view, you're absolutely right. But at the moment, my idea is to kind of bring this more scientific ways of describing into humanities and arts. And by scientific, I don't mean about scientific method, I simply mean more precise, right? Because if I can talk about different colors or textures or the shapes of brush strokes, right, on a scale of hundreds of thousands of distinctions, right, it's to me it's just simply more precise. It sounds maybe a bit utopian, and maybe it's only something for professionals, but perhaps, right, as a kind of certain math and computer science education would have to become more default. It can become, the next, I don't know, decade, 2, 3, more commonplace, because simply people have to learn about data and math to be competitive. Again, I'm not for or against it, I'm just simply saying I think we'll see kind of what's happening. But I want to say one thing is, there's one good thing here, right? So what I'm really interested in is precision and the ability to narrate, to describe small differences. Why? Because contemporary culture operates with small differences. It's not like postmodernism, which was about, very big things. I go to the store, right? In Korea, it doesn't need to be Zara because we're endless local stores which give me beautiful organic clothes for $10. Yeah, okay, here's part of a store, and there's 50 gray dresses which has different shades of gray and different materials, or 50 different white t-shirts, right? So I think the contemporary culture is very aristocratic in the sense that it operates with small distinctions. And that's why we need a different language. And I think that with human natural languages, Italian, right, Spanish, Russian, we're very good with categories, but we're not so well with small distinctions, although we do have metaphors, which is very powerful, right? So your question, absolutely, you basically got me to a wall, but I hope what I said is also not completely meaningless. That first of all, we kind of need it if we actually to be able to talk about culture of our time, which is about the small nuances. And I think what's more important to me is you can kill me in a double way, or I can kill myself, because there is also ways to criticize this idea, which is, let's say we describe t-shirts or dresses or paintings or 3D designs using hundreds of different dimensions, but maybe you still didn't capture the main thing because maybe you're not able to capture gestalt. So just because you can talk about all the different dimensions, maybe you're missing something. So this is the kind of arguments which in fact keep me up at night, so to speak, right? So just because you have, let's say everybody now speaks math, everybody can do beautiful data visualization, but that may be not enough, because the problem is that can we count for our aesthetic experiences by breaking them down into separate dimensions, and that's actually potentially maybe a bigger problem which we can solve, right? But let's think about it then, because we haven't gotten there yet. But so I think there are obviously problems, right? But ultimately, I'm finishing, right? I was educated as a painter since the age of 13. When I was 17, I said, okay, it's very nice. I can make nice painting. How does it really work? I want to describe it. And in a week from now, I'll be 61. I'm still trying to figure it out, right? So so basically my whole life is just one attempt. So I tried semiotics, but semiotics has the same problem because we use natural language. And now I've been trying computers and visualization, and I'm still trying. And, because I want to be able to talk intelligently about millions of beautiful 19th century paintings, which is not cubism or suprematism, which is realism, which are undescribed, right? Most of modern art is not described because we don't have a language for it, because it was figuration, right? So anyway, maybe it's a futile path, but that's been kind of my path. And of course, Italians are smart. We understand that, even though I don't say it in America, because in America, for some reason, semiotics became a bad word. Who knows why? I'm a semiotician, and and I can come out of my closet. So I am trying to continue semiotic project, but using kind of different path and see kind of how far we can go, and if I fail, at least we can say we have tried it. Yeah, so.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have several questions from our audience, but one was, sorry, I have to raise one because, when discussing about the topic of this lecture, we were taking into account also a famous quote from Adorno and Horkheimer that's infecting everything with sameness. That was the effect of the cultural industry. So my question is, we are really talking about small distinction. It looks like really a ground of the aesthetics, small distinction, delicacy, and so on. And on the other side, we feel that the digital apparatuses are moving to a kind of sameness. So my question is the prediction of Adorno, the description formulated by Adorno 70 years ago about the cultural industry, that creation of the sameness still working in our digital times, or the change of media paradigm has removed this this possibility of the sameness of taste, the sameness of
Sure,
production.
sure. Okay, so I would try to, yes, I would try to, because, I look at our questions, very interesting. So I would try to give you short answers, which is impossible, but I have to learn. Yeah. Well, so think about Adorno and Hokarn, right? So we're sitting there in LA in 1943, a bit terrified by what we see. Believe me, all Europeans who come to LA have the same feeling. And then, of course, in the 1950s, the French critics and young authors say, actually, Hollywood wasn't so bad. It actually was full of actors who had individual styles. So already 15 years later, the same Europeans who look at the Hollywood and said, actually, it was, it had much more variety, and were always actors. It wasn't just the sameness. So that's one thing. The second thing is, as you probably know, one of my key preoccupations, which also drives all this development, is in fact, how do we talk about this better, right? As opposed to you think this, Adorno thinks that, and I think something else. So how can we measure variability, right? Which of course is another very impossible thing, but we can. So for example, in the last 7 years, there has been a number of papers published where people use data sets of tens or hundreds of thousands of popular songs. And because music has this kind of formal theory, where music is, I think, supreme art, you can actually quantify to some extent variability. If I had time, I would even show you a project from New York Times Media Lab from 3 years ago, where we measure variability of summer hits, and we show you how it's changing very systematically. So we can actually talk about these questions quantitatively. And here's another example, right? What is the effect of recommendation engines? For example, YouTube, Spotify, Amazon. Do people end up looking at more things? Well, it's very hard to study because this data only fully available to the companies. But there was a study 10 years ago where we looked at the YouTube and we said, actually, according to our analysis, people who use YouTube recommendations basically watch more different things and more different genres, more different subjects, so it increases your variability. Even 2 years ago, Spotify also released the research saying, okay, we have looked at our data, and according to our data, the average Spotify consumer every month, you can, over the course of, I think, 24 months, you listen to more different songs and different genres. So far, with very few quantitative studies suggest that in fact, digital culture leads to more variability, not less. So why do all intellectuals don't think so, right? We should examine our own assumptions. But I think, right, it's very hard to make this statement general because you can always find examples pro and con, right? Obviously, you have another example that as everybody uses Google Analytics, right, and other tools like this, so everybody is now aware about the effect of changes on their Instagram or website on their visitor numbers, right? Google Analytics is installed like something 60% of all websites. So 10 years ago, you have a blog, I have a blog, he has a blog, and I start with image, you start a video, I start with text. Now everybody starts with image, everybody knows it gets you more visitors. So that's another example of how, in this case, digital culture leads to more uniformity, not because computer by itself is uniform, but because computer allows us to measure things. And once we have these measurements, everybody tries to do the same thing. So the bottom line is that it's definitely possible to find examples where computers lead to more cultural uniformity and to less. It kind of depends, right, where you want to look at. I think measuring cultural variability is itself interesting because, again, it asks us questions. How do we talk about culture? How do we describe it? And the tools are here, the data is here. So if you want to measure changing variability of web design, you can do it. It's just somebody has to sit down and do it. And the problem is that so far people who have the skills are in computer science, and we can't wait for them to do it. So ultimately, we have to learn these things ourselves if we want to find out these things for cultural areas, which we're interested. But ultimately, I want to say that to me, the single most biggest impact on variability is the connectivity, right? Like I have this feeling, but I don't have proof that 20, 30 years ago, you have always kind of like islands of people talking about different things. And now, right, every single art project I open, every single I think open the arts, it's like environment, climate change. It's like everybody talks about the same 5 things. which is terrible, right? But I don't think, again, it has to do with computers as a digital device. It has to do with computer as a kind of, right, as a connective device. And everybody looks at what everybody else is doing. Very few people want to take chances. Everybody says, okay, we're talking about this, let's talk about that. So I would like to measure it and see if it actually replaces, right? So while potentially a computer gives possibility, right, to talk about anything and to have millions of different interests, it seems to me that the long tail is actually getting shorter. But again, I don't have proof, so I want to measure this. So that's my answer, right? So maybe we have too much connectivity, right? Or maybe people are just too much afraid to fail. Okay, oh, this museum organized an event about COVID-19. Let's organize our event about COVID-19. Oh, this person posted about Notre Dame on fire. Let me also post, right? This kind of collective, mimicry behavior, right, is very much encouraged by digital media. So maybe we have to go back to say something terrible, but I'm not mean. A kind of Cold War where I don't talk to you, you don't talk to me, and we isolate and develop our own ideas. Maybe that's on the way. Anyway, next question.
I don't know, Amos. We are full of questions.
Yeah, but I can do quickly.
Okay, if you have time.
I have time. Yeah. Okay. Yves Laurent. How to apply with feeling of present to record digital artifacts? Okay. Yes. It says you're going to answer this question live. Sorry, no. Okay. So basically, how to analyze the present, which I talk about in language. I think I said language of new media, but I'm trying to theory of the present. How can we do it today when present became thicker and faster, and that's the speed? Well, that's partly I'm focusing my attention on Russian avant-garde because it's not changing. I now realize that all the academics become historians because you got tired of chasing the present. But I have to be more selective, right? So I can't talk about all digital culture. I can't talk about games, etc. I have to be very selective. Even I can do it, but definitely it becomes more difficult. Next question: how has the database logic influenced people's perception of reality since 2001? Okay, no problem. I'm finishing. I'm now decided, I'm going to write I can't do this MIT Press books because they kill me, 5 years, these books. I give a manuscript, 100,000 words. We edited. We made 13,000 edits. So I'm now promised to you. I promised you now, digital promise. It's better than communist promise. Digital oath. I'm going to publish short book every year online for free. So I already finished 1.5 this year. And in fact, the first book talks exactly about this. It's called, the title is The Art of a Data Stream. We kind of shift from database to a data stream. For more detailed question, answer, read the book. Okay, done. Next, anonymous attendee. Okay. What's your opinion of current state of our culture? Our culture means Italian or EU, I don't know. Okay, and what do you think Asian culture has a strong influence today? Why Asian culture has strong influence today? Well, look at the global middle class, right? That's, I think partly the places which have strong influence, if they economically can have influence, right? But it's also not so simple, right? Because you would think if China is so big, we should be all watching Chinese films and following Chinese fashion, but it's actually Japan still in Korea, right? Which is a tiny country, 50 million people. I can't answer it. This question actually very complicated, right? So I can't answer it in a kind of simple way. Would take more time. But my answer is, save some money for a ticket, go to Seoul, and you'll see. Okay. Next one, Namjoon Pike. Yes. So Namjoon Pike is in fact the hero of my new book, The Art of a Data Stream. It starts by talking about his exhibition in 1963, which supposedly where he claimed he was very good with PR, Namjoon Pike. He claims he invented video art. In fact, the television art was already proposed in Europe in 1947. Anyway, yes, from discontinuous to continuous, video mixer. Is there yet something? But very interesting, but Donata, what is the question? I'm not sure I fully understand. Sorry, let me go to the next one. What do you think about the role of gamification of future? Change approach to how we gain knowledge.
This is a good question, but
yeah, well,
it's another
this
lecture
is,
probably.
Another lecture, yeah. Well, it's I don't know, right? I'm very kind of conservative, right, in my taste. I'm not big fan of games or gamification because I play in life already. I don't like to go to casino. I find this to be super boring. So I actually find gamification is very boring. Like I'm trying not to use any apps which gamify me. Like I'm using this, Todoist, which is best to do application. So it gives me this, like karma points. But maybe because I know too much about how it works, it doesn't affect me. But I think gamification is okay as long as people learn, right? Yeah. Basically, we already lost to Asia, right? I mean, all the top graduate schools in America, right? I mean, Americans can't get into most of the graduate schools because all taken by Asian students. So Americans gamify things, and Asians are sitting on their behind and learning like crazy. Okay, so you can gamify as long as you're not going to lose. And it's very pragmatic. In a moment like this, everyone has access to the same tools. Well, no. Most people don't know how to use internet. You know how I know? So I get invited to do various events, right? Not always as interesting as this one, maybe once a week. Most people say, Lev Manovich, what is your, okay, I say, where can I find your CV? I said, well, you Google Manovich, and then my CV comes up. Oh, even every 2 weeks, I get some message from some friend on Messenger, say, dear Lev, so-and-so was to invite you to give a talk. We can't connect, we can't find you. Google and find my email, right? So most people don't know how to use internet, people, if academics knew how to use internet, we would be so much better already, right? Okay, no, seriously. Therefore, same possibilities to produce content. What is the key to producing qualitatively better content? Work your ass off, okay? Work your ass off. People like some influencers may spend 8 hours to make one photograph, right? If you watch YouTube videos about photographers, right, may spend how many hours to make one photograph? The film editor at Netflix may spend 3 days to do a rough cut of a 2-minute scene. Work, right? And I will finish this by telling you an anecdote about Lenin. Lenin, right? So Lenin says to his wife, dear wife, I can't spend time with you. I'm going to spend weekend with my girlfriend. Like, okay, sure. We're all communists, we understand you need some stimulation, dear comrade, go. And when he calls his girlfriend, says, sorry, I can't spend time with you. My wife really needs me. Of course, dear comrade, of course, my darling, I understand. You have to be with family. So what do we say? Lenin tells his wife, he goes to his girlfriend, he goes to the library, and what he works. Okay, sorry, maybe it's not very politically correct, but kind of like, but this is actually the answer, right? Work. I work because I love it, because I don't know what else I'll be doing if I'm not working. I don't know what is a holiday, because every moment I write some idea in my notebook, it's like already a holiday, right? From worrying about all the emails I have to answer. So I'm not sure what it means to take holiday for creative people, but if you have to, you can. Maybe I'm too much American, but the point is that if you want to produce quality content, whether it is academic theory or YouTube or whatever, but I have a particular advice also for students. I have a theory actually how to be successful. Involves data science, but don't do what everybody else already doing, because you're too late, right? So figure out how to predict the future, figure out which things are emerging, right? And then figure out which of these emerging things will be needed, and then be the first. I think the reason I'm here is not because I'm particularly good. Often my articles are not so great, but often I was the first one to write about something, right? Even you get credit, right? Whatever, okay, so don't spend time only learning about your field, because you'll be obsolete in a few years, right? Learn as much as possible about everything, travel, and learn how to anticipate the future. So that's basically my advice. Works for me. Something else? So this is, I think we got to explain your background. Explain your background. The background. Nice. Yes, finally. So we got you guys in the design school, right? How often do you see people using some design background? Why? Okay, anyway, background, I like, now these days, I think it's been fashionable for a couple of years, gradients, right? And gradients is very easy. There's a gradient tool in Photoshop. So I kind of had this idea that I want to make posters for my book, but I got lazy, I only made 3. So I said, how can I make some nice background quickly for my posters? So I just started using gradient tool. And it's also nice, right? Nice colors, complementary, but not completely, right? Yellow and violet. I think it works well. But I can also like reveal myself. But it's because we live in my wife's apartment, which belongs to her mother, to her parents. It's like the 60s, 80s design. You know how with anecdote, right? People go to Kandinsky when he represents Bauhaus. It's like this Bauhaus house and everything is very modern. Even if you're his close friend, there's a secret door. He opens the door, you go second part of the house, and then there's icons everywhere. And he gives you tea, which is true. Okay, so I'll show you what's behind my background. Okay, seriously. Okay, here it is. Okay. What else? Okay, is more questions?
No, I think that for no, probably we have another question of Italo Zuffi. Is the
which one?
No.
From who?
Yes, no.
Well,
you see?
Philosophy. DIY? You mean DIY question or?
No, Italo Zuffi asked, isn't trying to foresee the future a type of ideology?
Okay, yes. Isn't trying to foresee future type of ideology. Well, so
question by Slavoj.
Yeah. Okay. So I of course I got interested in the idea, right? Who is doing this kind of future studies? So there's a Wikipedia page, future studies. So there's there's many different overlapping fields, right? There's a speculative design, speculative architecture. There's future studies. People like in the 50s, like Rand Corporation, using game theory to predict what happens in the realm of nuclear war, right? During Cold War. But this is not ideology, precisely. Not everything is ideology. Yeah, thank God. Only leftist people think everything is ideology because they themselves think everything is ideology. It's a problem, The problem of future is, how to get rid of Marxists. That's a problem. Who completely took over our public culture. It's especially in America. That's a problem. That's the biggest problem. They're very hard to get rid of. Anyway, so the idea that you can have a science of the future actually was this idea was proposed by Gilbert Wells, right? The science fiction writer. In 1900, he gave a lecture, and he said, "Look, we should really have a science of the future." Very nice short lecture, and then he published it as a book, and that was the kind of idea. And then I think there's a history, right, to this idea. 1950s, Cold War. When you have 1990s, people like Ray Kurzweil, right? Singularity. So you can actually track, like most ideas, you can track it to kind of particular places. But the question is like, why I'm interested? Well, I'm not so interested in the future, right? Actually, I'm also interested in the present. I think for me, this is an interesting exercise because first of all, as I said, it's trying to get people to look at the present a bit like in a larger perspective. It's trying to get people to look at the previous centuries where people had very interesting, very different ideas about the future, more interesting than today. Like, for example, usually with my students, I show them work of Constant, right? The famous architect, artist, thinker, right? Who designed the so-called New Babylon, right? Which some of you know was this utopian project, but he was also very ironic about it. From late 50s until mid 70s. And he imagined this future where the computers have taken care of work, so humans don't have to work. So instead, right, we wander through this endless architectural kind of construction this kind of superstructure, right, which covers the world, and I'm involved in play, and part of this play is that the environment changes, right? So it's an incredibly sophisticated idea, and kind of more interesting than what we have today, right? So in a strange way, I'm interested in the future in order to look at the past and to help people uncover a variety of different ideas about human life, human work, human art, which people already have in the past, because our human past is like science fiction. The science fiction is 19th century. The science fiction is even 1995, when people thought that globalization will change, internet, etc., right? So, so maybe a way to discover the past, because past looks very boring, right? Very nerdy. So maybe if you kind of look at the past from the lens of the future, it becomes more sexy. Maybe that's the idea.
Professor Manovich, unfortunately, our time is over. Because
okay, sure. Yeah, but it's okay. I think I'll look at the questions. I think we took care of most of it. Yeah. Yes.
We did.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you so much.
Good job. Thank you very much. Okay, we really hope to meet you here in Milan next time, since you have been guest of this town several times, or maybe in Korea, as you suggested. Right now it's evening time in Korea. It's night, while here it's around noon. So the topics.
So the students have until the end of the day to invent a future, and then submit, and then send me their projects to drop into Dropbox. By I'm just kidding. No, but I'm going to say, guys, this is the most difficult project, right? So even though I have to write about what my Moscow students did, they're wonderful, but the ideal future was, okay, in the future we'll have like we'll have like organic coffee and some kind of recycled fashion. I said, yeah, but we already have it. It's very I think it's very hard for people to think like 10, 20, 30 years ago. So that's why maybe it's a good idea. It's so hard. Maybe it's too hard, but anyway. So I hope, I know sometimes I speak too fast, but it's only because I feel a certain emotional connection to you. I do hope, we'll have a chance to speak more slowly, slow thinking, maybe next year.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And again, thank you so much for honoring me. There's so much to talk about. Why particular chairs became famous in history of industrial design, and why 1968 was the most creative year after 1999. I'm sure between Leonardo, Amos, Stefano, and this robot, somebody has the answer. So thank you so much. Thank you so much.
It was really an incredible pleasure to stay with you for the last seminar of our public program, Mid Explosion, Professor Manovich. Really.
Yes.
Last thing. So I go to there's 20 independent bookstores in my city, a small city in Korea. I go over, look what I find. I never knew about this book. I never knew about it. Just like it's just in Korea. So I'm going to read it. I'm going to Caffo. I'm going to read this book, and it looks amazing. Looks amazing. I'm sure you all know that, but somehow he's not so well known, I think, globally now. So So maybe next book is going to be called "Learning from Milan." How Milan can teach us about the future, because I think this town had so much intelligence, sometimes embedded in design, but sometimes people forget that behind design there's ideas of people like him, right? So. Thank you so much.
Really, we really hope to go on with this conversation here in Triennale of NABA or whatever, but here in Milan next time. Thank you very much. Thank you to our attendees, and it has been a really lovely couple of hours of discussion. And
thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Manovich.